Okay, welcome to part C. Okay, I want to talk to this segment mainly about what happens in an exchange and how, if it's a voluntary exchange, this always increases total value. Before I do that, there's one little concept. First, I want to start off. I think we'll talk more about it later in the book. Actually, maybe not. The key is opportunity costs. Okay, this is an important concept in economics, and it has to do with when you buy something. There's often the monetary costs, and then there's often additional costs which aren't reflected in the price you pay. They're not in the money, but what happens is there's an opportunity that you could have done something else. Okay, so here's the best example of such a case. So you say when you go to college, the monetary costs are the tuition, the books, and other supplies, and maybe the living costs you have to pay for living in the dorms. Okay, those are the three main things that cost something when you go to college. Okay. And say if you're an in-state student for George Mason, those may be a total of something like $20,000 a year. But an economist would look at this and say those aren't the only costs. If you go to college, let's say you spend 4 years to get a degree. Now, lots of people say the costs are $20,000 per year. That's a total of $80,000. Is it worth it? Will my future wages be over the stream of my life 80,000 greater? And if so, I should go to college. That's the way a lot of people think of it. But economists would say, no, you're leaving something out. And this is that during those 4 years, you could have been doing something else. You could have been working. You could have been having a vacation. Those are the opportunity costs, what you could have been doing. And so let's just say that it's lost wages. So maybe you could have been having a job where you make, say, 15,000 a year or 25,000 a year. If so, you would add those to the monetary costs to get the true total costs. And then, when you wanted to say, is it worth it to go to college? You would say, um, um, say the opportunity cost, you could have made $15,000 an hour at some menial job. So then the total costs are $35,000 per year. 35,000 times 4, I get 140,000. So the proper analysis to do would be to say, well, the future earnings, will they be at least 140,000 greater than they would have been had I not gone to college? That's what you add in all the costs, including these non-monetary costs, which we call the opportunity costs. Okay, so I'll talk more about that later when we do some questions from the back of the chapter. But the key is that's an important concept, opportunity costs. If you like, be sure to look that up in Wikipedia. So it's something that every educated person should know, and definitely everyone who's ever taken a course in economics should know what the definition of opportunity cost is. Okay. Next, I want to explain something about the notion of value and how exchanges between two people always increase the total value. Okay. Now, before I get to that, let me first talk about the way economists used to talk about value. Before supply and demand curves were invented, by the way, this was in the late 1800s, and it was Alfred Marshall who invented them. Before Marshall, especially around the time of Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Karl Marx, economists would often talk about what is the value of a good. And for instance, they would have this big debate over whether water is more valuable than diamonds. And you say, well, people pay a higher price for diamonds, even though you need water. You're not going to live without water, but diamonds you could do without, yet the price seems to be higher. And they tried as best they could to come up with this objective definition of the value of a good. And they tried for a long time with something called the labor theory of value, and the what that is, it says that the value of a good is determined by how many person hours it would take to produce that good. And it really didn't go that far. Economists have abandoned that idea. And now the idea is that value is subjective. And we say it's subject to each individual. Now, you've probably heard the expression, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Now, economists take that same notion and say value is in the eye of the beholder. And the idea, I'm going to give an example in a second. For baseball, there may be one person who values a baseball at $5, another at $3, another at $8, and how valuable that baseball is determines on who gets it. Okay. Before I get to that example, I want you to think of this. How kind of nonsensical that labor theory of value is. Here's an example. Suppose a person took 10,000 hours to make this painting. Okay. Suppose once the person did it, the painting was just awful. It was ugly. No one wanted it. You might as well just throw it away. Now, under the labor theory of value, you would say, oh, but it took 10,000 person hours, and say the going wage is $10 an hour, so the value of that painting would be $100,000. But economists today say, well, if no one wants it, the value is zero. Okay, so that's where I'm going to be going. Okay, so first, when we say, and the book sometimes will say that value is subjective, always means it's subject to the individual. It differs by individual. Okay, now I want to get to the point about value and how exchange to economists is this magical, beautiful thing that it increases value. And let me explain. I'll explain with that as we go on. Okay, now here's the example I want to give. First, let's suppose there's a baseball. Okay, there's three people. Anna, Bob, and Carlos. Anna values the baseball at $5, Bob at $8, Carlos at $3. Okay. Let's suppose that Anna owns the baseball. Okay. So that means sometimes we economists will talk about the utility, the person's this kind of a nebulous notion of how happy they are in dollars sometimes. Okay, so let's suppose Anna has $1,000 in her bank account, owns no other goods except the baseball. So her total utility is her $1,000 in her bank account plus this $5 that she puts as the equivalent she would put to the baseball, that this is worth $5 to her. Okay. If Anna owns the baseball, okay, her total utility is $1,005. Now, let's ask what is Bob's utility. Let's assume he has $2,000 in his bank account, owns no other goods. Okay, so he doesn't own the baseball, so he gets zero value from the baseball, which he doesn't own. Okay, so his total utility is $2,000. Carlos, similarly, doesn't own the baseball, but he has $3,000 in his bank account. His total utility is $3,000. So the total utility is just $1,005 plus $2,000 plus $3,000, which is $6,005. Okay, now, thought experiment. The benevolent dictator says, look, Bob values that baseball more than Anna. So we could increase the total value. We could increase the value of that baseball by just taking it from Anna and giving it to Bob. So in particular, here's what would happen if the benevolent dictator did that. So now Anna's utility, so she loses. It's now 1,000. She lost the baseball. But Bob's utility is greater because he now has the baseball that's worth $8 to him. His new utility is 2008. And I wrote this wrong. Sorry. Carlos's utility, he still does not own the baseball. Carlos' utility is 3,000. Total utility is now 1,000 plus 2008 plus 3,000, 6,008. So the benevolent dictator, just by taking the ball from Anna, giving it to Bob, has increased total utility by $3. We'll say that's a value increasing proposition or action, value increasing action. If the government takes the baseball from Anna, gives it to Bob. Okay. Now, meanwhile, what if instead the benevolent dictator, benevolent but mistaken, misguided, had taken the baseball from Anna and given it to Carlos? Okay, what would happen? Then all of a sudden, now Anna's utility is still 1,000 plus 0. Bob's utility is now 2,000 plus 0. Bob does not own the baseball now. Okay, Carlos does though, and Carlos's value of the baseball was $3. So now Carlos's utility is 3,000 plus 3, 3,003. Total utility is now 6,003. Okay, before it was 6,005. So that action is value decreasing. Okay, so keep that in mind. So a dictator could do things that could increase total value or could do things that decrease total value. Okay, so that's the warm-up exercise. Now, I want you to think about what happens. So, erase too much. Anna owns the baseball. Okay. Suppose she sells the baseball to Bob for $7. Okay. What happens to utility? Okay. Okay. Anna's, let's see, old utility equals, she had 1,000 in her bank account, plus she had the baseball, 5, so 1,005. Bob's old utility equals 2,000. He had in his bank account plus 0, which equals 2,000. So total equals 3,005. Okay. Anna's new utility equals 1,000 plus 0, because she now doesn't own the baseball. Okay, that 0 is for now she doesn't own the baseball, but she got $7 from Bob. Okay, so plus 7. Bob's new utility equals 2,000 plus, he now owns the baseball, so it's now $8, because that's his value of the baseball. But because of that transaction, he's bought the baseball for $7. He's lost $7. He takes $7 out of his bank account, minus 7. Okay, Anna's new utility is 1,007. Bob's new utility is 2,001. Okay. Now, I want you to note something. With this transaction, both are better off. And that's the notion we economists talk about. If there's a voluntary transaction, both people will be made better off. They wouldn't make it if they wouldn't, each one acting individually would say, I'm not going to make this transaction unless I'm better off. Okay? So if they make it, both must become better off. Notice that Anna, her new utility is 1,007 before it was 1,005. Bob's new utility is 2,001 before it was 2,001. 2,000 in total is now 2008. Oh, excuse me, 3008. Before, the total was 3005. Okay? So the notion is, by this transaction, total value has increased. Okay, just like the benevolent dictator taking it from Anna to Bob, that increased total utility by $3. Okay, but this we didn't need a dictator to do. It happened just by a voluntary transaction, and we created $3 worth of value. Okay, now I want you to think about this. Suppose, I think this is about true, that a can of Diet Coke, it's about the same value. Let's suppose for a second that everyone values it at 50 cents. Everyone thinks, how much would you pay for a can of Diet Coke? 50 cents. Everyone thinks that. What we have done as economists, or just allowed this voluntary transaction to go forward, this is how I want to say, this is wonderful and majestic. This has created just as much value as if an engineer found a way to make some machine without taking any inputs at all, could magically out of thin air create 6 cans of Diet Coke. 6 times 50 cents is $3. Okay? That value is just as much value we get just from this exchange. Just from the exchange that gives the same amount of value as this magical new machine. Economists think that way. That just by exchange, this is magical, wondrous. We can create value almost out of thin air. Okay? In the same way, if this were the case, that Bob valued the baseball at 8, Anna at 5, if for some reason they were prevented from making that exchange, there was some bad policy from the government that disallowed such an exchange, we economists just want to cry. So there's $3 of value that's just going away, that's just being disappeared. Okay? That's the way we economists think about this. Okay? So that's one lesson I want you to think about. Okay? Second, I want you to notice something about this. So I said she sells the baseball to Bob for $7. Suppose instead it was a different price. Suppose it were 6. Okay? What would that do to our calculations? Well, down here, we would just say Anna's new utility would be 1,000 plus 6. Her new utility would be 1,006. Bob's new utility would be 2,000 plus now 8 because he has the baseball. But he would only pay $6. His new utility would be 2,002. But turns out the total would remain the same. It's still 3,008, even though we changed the price. Okay? The total value we created is still an extra $3 because it's now the total value is 3,008, before it's 3,005. But the total value we created is the same, even though we had a different price. So often that will happen in economics. The price doesn't matter that much in terms of making the total value. The key was that we had this exchange. That was the key. Okay? And it didn't really matter that much to the price. Now, by the way, you had to make the price in between 5 and 8, because if you made it 4, Bob says, hey, Anna, I'll buy the baseball from you for $4. Anna would say, no, I'm not selling. I prefer the baseball, which is worth $5 to me, than the $4 you're willing to give me. That would make me worse off. I won't accept that. Okay. Likewise, if Bob said, or if Anna said, I'll sell it to you for 9, okay, Bob would say, no, I won't take that because the baseball is only worth $8 to me. If I pay you 9, that means I'm like having a negative profit. I'm losing $1 worth of value. Bob would say, no, I'm not going to buy it for anything above $8. Okay. So if it's a voluntary exchange, the only possible price would be one that's in between 5 and 8. That's the only way both can become better off. Okay. So that's the point of a price. Third point. Okay. Before, I talked about the thought experiment of a benevolent dictator who may have been mistaken or misguided, who took the ball from Anna and gave it to Carlos. By the way, so I've just shown that with transactions, with voluntary transactions, we can achieve the same outcome that a benevolent dictator could do by taking the ball from Anna and giving it to Bob. Okay. On the other hand, what if, and remember also the dictator could have been misguided and could have taken it from Anna, given it to Carlos, which would have decreased total value by $2. What if we lived in a world where only voluntary exchange happened? We did not have such a benevolent dictator. Would Anna ever sell to Carlos? The answer is no. Okay. Carlos is not going to pay a price above $3. So if Anna tries to charge him $4, Carlos will say, no, it's not worth $4 to me. I will not take your offer. Anna says, well, I'm not going to sell it below $5. So if Carlos, you try to buy it for $2.50, say, I'm losing $2.50. No way am I going to sell it for that. So if we're in a world where it's voluntary transaction, Anna will never sell to Carlos. So as a consequence, we'll never have that value decreasing transaction, that value decreasing case. We'll never have a transfer of the baseball to Carlos. The only way it happened is when we had a dictator taking it. But through voluntary exchange, you can never have exchanges that decrease the total value in the entire population. Okay, that's an important point. And one thing that's great and majestic about voluntary exchange. Okay, final point I want to make. The book talks about middlemen. Okay, let's think about Anna and Bob. Let's take Carlos out. So Anna owns the baseball. Suppose she sells the baseball to a middleman, some broker who buys baseballs and sells them. And suppose she buys the baseball for $6. Anna owns the baseball. She says the baseball for the middleman for $6. And then the middleman sells the baseball to Bob for $7. Okay. What is total utility? So what happens? So Anna's new utility equals 1,000 plus 6. Before it was 1,000 plus 5 because she owned the baseball. Okay. Tell you what, I'm going to use red to put her former. So now equals 1,006. Before it was 1,005. Okay. The middleman's utility let's say he had $0. No, wait. Let's see. He had 4,000 in his bank account, and now he owns. Okay. I was gonna say he owns the baseball, but he doesn't because he sold it to Bob. So he had 4,000 in his bank account. He loses 6 because he paid $6 to Ann, but then he gains 7 because he sold it to Bob. So his new utility is 4,001. Before, even though we didn't think about him in the situation, he had 4,000 in his bank account. Now he has 4,001. And then Bob's new utility equals, he had 2,000 in his bank account. He paid 7 to the middleman, but then he gained the baseball, which is worth 8 to him, And so his new utility is 2001, and before it was only 2000. And then if we have total equals um, 7,008, whereas before the transaction, the total was only 7,005. Okay. The key is I want you to see that the middleman, even when we put in a middleman, we still increase total utility. We still increase value. Okay. It's just that Anna and Bob's increase in utility is slightly less than before. Okay. But the total, as long as we include the middleman, it's still um, uh, three more than it was in the original situation. Okay. The book talks about how we as humans often kind of look upon middlemen with scorn. We don't like him. Suppose we consider the middleman a monster, non-human person. We don't even consider his utility. So he gained $1 of utility. We had a total of three. If we cast out the middleman, this would be like increasing value by only $2. We throw out that one that the middleman got. We're still increasing value. Okay, maybe not as much as before, where we didn't have a middleman, but it's still we've still increased value. One point the book makes is that these middleman, it may diminish the increase in utility between Ann and Bob. Okay, but on the other hand, what if we were in a situation where Anna and Bob didn't know about each other? So Bob wanted a baseball and he values it at 8. Anna owns one, but she doesn't know Bob or doesn't know how to sell it. What this middleman does is it increases the total value between Anna and Bob by $2, which they may not have increased at all if Anna and Bob had no way of knowing about each other. So often these middlemen um, increase the total value. Okay, and I want you to notice that, and that's a point that the chapter makes. Okay, and we'll see it's often in very important aspect of economics. We say an exchange is majestic, magic, wonderful. Uh, Sometimes it wouldn't occur without a middleman. So even though we often have scorn for middlemen, sometimes they serve a useful purpose. Okay, so be sure to read the book's chapter, the chapter 2, where the book discusses this, and think about that. How the beauty of an exchange, okay? How in some ways an exchange is just as valuable as if an engineer created this magical machine that out of thin air could create 6 Diet Cokes. Okay, so I'm biased, but I like to think that we economists, we think of institutions that'll help exchange, help create exchange. I think what we do is often just as valuable as things that the engineers do. But I'm biased. But regardless, I want you to think about that. Okay, that's part C. So we're on part D. We'll talk about some questions from the end of chapter 2. Okay, see you there.